The station smelled of coal smoke, damp wood, and old iron, the kind of place that held echoes longer than voices. Night pressed hard against the windows, turning the glass into black mirrors, and the last train had already thundered away, leaving behind only a drifting hush and a few scraps of paper skittering across the floor. On the far bench, wrapped in a thin, worn shawl, the native woman slept curled on her side. Her dark hair had fallen loose, partly hiding her face, and one moccasin had slipped from her foot. Her toes pale against the cold planks. Even in sleep, one arm was locked tight around a small satchel, as if it were the last thing in the world that belonged to her. The cowboy slowed when he saw her. He had come to the station for supplies and a message from the telegraph. Nothing more, but something about the way she slept, tense, guarded, ready to wake, made him stop. He noticed the faint bruise on her wrist and the way her shoulders were drawn inward, as if she had learned to take up as little space as possible. The ticking clock on the wall sounded too loud in the emptiness. When his boot scuffed the floor, her eyes flew open. In an instant she was awake, staring at him with sharp, dark eyes full of caution. Her body coiled like she expected trouble to step closer. For a long second neither of them spoke. He lifted his hands slightly, not in surrender but in reassurance, showing her he meant no harm. "The train's gone," he said quietly. "It'll be cold till morning." "I know," she replied, her voice steady, though her fingers tightened around the satchel strap. "I'm waiting." He nodded, understanding more than she realized. He had seen what the night did to people stranded in places like this, how quickly waiting could turn into danger. The station master had already locked up, and the town outside wasn't kind to women alone, especially not ones with nowhere to go. "My ranch is just west of here," he said after a moment, choosing his words carefully. "There's a fire, coffee, and a spare bed." She studied him, searching his face for lies. "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Because I saw you sleeping on a bench," he answered, "and because doing nothing felt worse." The clock kept ticking. Wind rattled the windows. Finally, he added softly, "Come home with me if you want." After a long silence, she slipped her foot back into her moccasin and slowly stood, still watching him. "Just for the night," she said. "I leave at dawn." He tipped his hat, a small, respectful gesture. "That's your choice." Together, they stepped out into the cold, the empty station fading behind them like a chapter neither of them wished to return to. Morning came quietly to the ranch, pale light slipping through the small windows and resting on rough-hewn walls. The native woman woke at the faint sound of a rooster crowing somewhere beyond the house. Her body tense for a moment before she remembered where she was. The bed beneath her was narrow but clean, a thick quilt pulled up to her chest. For the first time in many nights, she had slept without the constant fear of being shaken awake. She sat up slowly, listening. The house was calm, filled with the low crackle of a fire and the distant clink of metal. When she stepped into the main room, the cowboy was at the stove, his back to her, sleeves rolled up as he stirred a pot. The smell of coffee and frying eggs filled the air, warm and grounding. He glanced over his shoulder, surprised but not startled, and offered a small smile that carried no expectation. "Morning," he said simply. "Hope you slept." "I did," she answered, then paused, as if the truth surprised her. She moved carefully, still unsure of the rules of this place, and sat at the table when he set a plate in front of her. They ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable one. It was the kind that allowed breathing, the kind that didn't demand explanations. After breakfast, he handed her a cup of coffee and nodded toward the window. "You can leave whenever you like," he said. "Road's clear. I won't stop you." She watched steam rise from the cup, then looked back at him. "You're not afraid I'll take something?" He shook his head. "If you wanted to, you already would have." The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than suspicion ever could. She followed him outside, the cold air sharp but clean, the land stretching wide and open in a way she hadn't seen in a long time. He showed her the barn, the horses, the fences worn by wind and years. There was work to be done, but no rush, no barking orders. When she offered to help, he accepted without surprise, handing her gloves as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As they worked side by side, She spoke in fragments, about the station, about promises that had led nowhere, about roads that never seemed to end. He listened without interrupting, without asking for more than she gave. By midday, her shoulders felt lighter, as if each word spoken had loosened something tight inside her. When she mentioned leaving at dawn, as she had promised, he nodded again. "You should go where you want," he said. She looked across the open land, then back at the house behind her. "I don't know where that is anymore," she admitted. "For now," he replied gently, "you can stay here." She didn't answer, but she didn't pack either. And as the sun climbed higher, the ranch began to feel less like a stopping place, and more like a pause she desperately needed. The dust on the road rose long before the riders appeared, a pale warning drifting across the fields. The native woman noticed it first, her hands stilling on the fence wire as something old and sharp tightened in her chest. She had learned to read signs like that, how trouble often announced itself, quietly giving just enough time to brace. When the two men finally came into view, their horses pushed hard, eyes wild, their faces already set with recognition that made her blood run cold. The cowboy saw the change in her at once. He stepped forward without a word, placing himself slightly ahead of her, not blocking her path, but making it clear she wasn't alone. The men reined in near the gate, smirks curling their mouths, as they looked her over like she was something misplaced that needed to be returned. One of them laughed and tipped his hat, his gaze lingering far too long. "There you are," he said. "Been looking all over." She didn't answer. Her fingers curled into fists, nails biting into her palms. The cowboy's voice cut through the tension, low and steady. "You're on private land. Best turn around." The men shifted their attention to him, surprise flickering, then annoyance. One dismounted boots crunching on gravel as he took a step closer. "This don't concern you," he said. "She owes us." The cowboy didn't move his hand toward his gun, but his stance changed solid as the earth beneath him. "She doesn't owe anyone here," he replied. "And she's with me." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. The man glanced toward the house, the barn, the open fields where there was nowhere to hide and no witnesses to call. He weighed pride against risk, and slowly, reluctantly, he chose sense. With a muttered curse, he turned back to his horse. Dust rose again as they rode off, leaving behind silence and a deep, trembling relief. Her knees weakened once they were gone. She sank onto the fence rail, breath coming in shallow bursts. "They followed me," she said, shame and fear tangled in her voice. "I didn't mean to bring trouble here." "You didn't," the cowboy said firmly. He crouched beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence without being trapped by it. "They're gone. You're safe." The word safe felt fragile, almost foreign. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to steady herself, and a soft, broken laugh escaped before tears followed. She told him then haltingly, about the job that never existed, the ride she'd accepted out of desperation the moment. She'd realized too late that freedom had been an illusion. He listened, jaw tight, anger quiet but deep. When she finished, the afternoon light had softened, stretching shadows across the land. "You don't have to stay," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I'm not asking you to," he answered. "But if you do, no one takes you from here." That night, when she lay in the spare bed, she didn't bolt the door. For the first time in a long while, she let sleep come without fighting it, trusting the silence to hold. Spring arrived without asking permission, creeping across the land in quiet, determined ways. The mornings grew softer, the frost retreating as green pushed through the soil, and the ranch slowly changed its colors. With each passing day, the native woman found herself waking with less fear in her chest. The house no longer felt like a shelter borrowed for a night, but a place, shaped by steady hands and patience. She moved through it easily now, her footsteps sure, her presence no longer cautious. They worked together from dawn until the light began to fade, sharing the rhythm of the land. She learned the habits of the cattle and the moods of the horses, how the wind shifted before rain, and how the sky warned of heat. In return, she taught him small, quiet things, how certain plants eased pain, how to listen to the land instead of trying to command it. Their words were few, but understanding grew in the spaces between them, unspoken yet strong. Some evenings they sat on the porch as the sun sank low, the horizon burning gold and red. She spoke of her mother then, of songs sung at night and stories carried through generations. Her voice, once guarded, flowed freely now, and he listened as if every word mattered. He told her of his own losses, of a life built alone because it had seemed easier than risking hope. In those moments, something fragile and new took shape between them, not born of need but of choice. One morning she packed her satchel again. Old habits were hard to break, and part of her still believed she was only passing through. He watched from the doorway, his expression calm, but his eyes searching her face. "If you want to go," he said quietly, "I won't stop you." She stood there for a long moment, then set the satchel down. "I stayed here because I needed safety," she said. "I'm staying now because I want to." The truth of it settled between them, warm and steady. He stepped forward, not to claim her, but to stand beside her. When he reached for her hand, it was a question, not a demand. She answered by lacing her fingers with his, grounding herself in the simple certainty of the gesture. The ranch no longer felt like a refuge from the world, but a place within it, shaped by two lives choosing to move forward together. The memory of the station bench faded, replaced by open skies and shared mornings. What had begun with a single act of kindness became something deeper, a home built not from walls or land, but from trust, respect, and the courage to stay.